After the fighting ended, Commander Liao Yaoxiang of the new 2nd Division went to see Joseph Stilwell and said proudly, "The new 22nd Division beat the Japanese 5th Division and 18th Division, the crack units of the Japanese Army." General Stilwell had not been well disposed toward Liao Yaoxiang, a subordinate of General Du Yuming. He appreciated Sun Liren more than Liao Yaoxiang, but he felt sincerely happy for the courage and wisdom the new 22nd Division displayed in battle. For many years, Liao Yaoxiang had harbored some negative opinions about General Stilwell, but he made this comment on the general: "He is a true soldier, an outstanding commander. I admire him for his strong will, courage, down-to-earth working style, and total devotion. I respect and admire him as my superior officer." After the victory in the Mainquan-Walao-Bum battle, General Stilwell flew to Lido to visit the wounded Chinese soldiers in the 20th General Hospital. Many soldiers had been killed and wounded in fighting. General Stilwell, however, set up field medical teams and hospitals to form a 3-tier rescue system, with the General Hospital in the rear area. As a result, the mortality rate of the wounded soldiers quickly decreased. This field medical work much raised the fighting morale of the Chinese soldiers. After the war, the Chinese Army in India wrote a summary as follows: "The Americans set up several large hospitals near Lido and sent many medics and much equipment to go along with the advancing troops. Light wounds were treated on the spot so that the soldiers could go on to fight after a short rest. Those with serious wounds were flown to the hospitals in the rear and given blood transfusions. Very few of the seriously wounded died. Their work retained the fighting strength and boosted the fighting morale of the officers and men." At the time, a soldier at the front line said jokingly, "Charge ahead with an easy mind. Don't be afraid of being wounded. You can ride in a plane." The battle, of course, was nevertheless brutal.
5个多月的作战，第一期胡康河湖反击战，仅仅新编第22师廖耀湘部就阵亡了57名连长。大家可以算一算，一个师3个步兵团，一个步兵团9个步兵连，3、9、27，新22师编制上一线的步兵连长才27人呐，阵亡了57个，伤亡了2遍呐。
On March the 13th, General Stilwell went to the front line. The next day, a new round of attacks was launched. The Japanese were beaten and fled. It was now a good time to encircle the enemy and go in for the kill.
但是这个时候，日本人可不跟你客气。日本集结兵力，准备已久的所谓乌号作战，也就是进攻英帕尔的战役，这个时候同步展开。换言之，缅北是我们在打日本人。 而缅甸中部，日本人是在向印度的英帕尔发起了反击进攻作战，啊，那么英军在英帕尔的守军一触即溃，英帕尔被围，危在旦夕，啊，作为英军最高统帅、东南亚战区最高司令的蒙巴顿，这个时候到这儿来，目的驻节只不过是个幌子，要兵才是真正的目的。
An outstanding contrast was shown between Joseph Stilwell and Louis Mountbatten in regards behaviour and social manners. Mountbatten wore a well-tailored army uniform of brown colour for tropical weather, as well as gold epaulets and 3 ribbons. The medals pinned on his chest shined brightly. Stilwell, on the other hand, wore a loose field uniform and a steel helmet. He had no medals and had a rifle slung over his shoulder. On his way to Burma, Mountbatten had an escort of 16 fighter planes. Stilwell, on the other hand, travelled between China and Burma by plane without any escort. Stilwell didn't approve of the extravagant behaviour of Mountbatten. He said, "The fuel he used is enough for us fighting a week." But despite of different points of view and behaviour, the two generals got along well. General Stilwell asked the new 30th Division of the Chinese Army to send a regiment to strengthen the defence of Imphal. He also moved some British troops from central India over to that area. The positions in Imphal were held. The Chinese army stationed in India launched the second major offensive in the Morgang River Valley against the Japanese 18th Division. In the previous battle, the Chinese had annihilated 60% of the troops of the Japanese 18th Division. But the remaining force of this division held their positions in the wild mountains. But despite the fact that the Japanese army sent reinforcements to them from central, southern and western Burma on 12 occasions, the doom of the 18th Division was sealed. The town of Morgang was a point of vital strategic importance for the Japanese in the Morgang River Valley. In this battle, the Chinese army adopted its ever-victorious tactic of maneuver on the move.
那么廖耀湘的新编第22师加强新30师的一个团，再加战车营，正面进攻，还是正面进攻，右路正面进攻。那么新38师的孙立人部，那就不是一个像我们讲胡康河谷打孟关的时候那种瓦鲁班的小规模的迂回穿插了，而是大纵深、远距离的多路迂回穿插。
The Japanese deployed their main force in Morgang and strengthened their position in Karmang in front and their position in Myitkyina in the rear. These three places were connected with highways and railways.
新38师的迂回穿插，兵分3路，3个步兵团，一个团直接向新22师正面进攻的加麦，就是这个屏障守敌的翼侧侧后实施穿插，直接配合新22师的正面进攻。我先把你的屏障给你打掉，这是第一个团。第二个团也就是中路，直接插向了孟拱与加麦，就是它这个屏障之间的这段公路，直接切断孟拱与加麦守敌之间的联系。那么这样，一，你加麦守敌后路就断了，你就没有现在继续守下去了；二，孟拱的守敌不可能派兵去增援，援兵我给你挡住了；三，孟拱初步也处于我们的围攻。
The new 22nd Division and the new 38th Division of the Chinese Army in India completed the encirclement of the Japanese garrison in Karmang and broke the communications of the Japanese troops stationed in Karmang, Morgang and Myitkyina. Japanese troops were isolated in their positions. The Chinese troops first wiped out the Japanese in Karmang. Morgang had been encircled by 2 regiments of the new 38th Division. Soon, the Japanese there were wiped out too.
加麦孟拱守敌被全歼之后，整个孟拱河谷反击战实际上也就画上一个非常圆满的句号。战果同样是非常丰硕的。胡康河谷反击战一共歼敌12000人，孟拱河谷反击战一共歼敌11500人，也是将近12000人的样子。整个第18师团12次部位补兵之后，基本上就打光了。野人山被打穿了，下一个目标密支那，也就是我们缅北反攻作战第1期的终点，已经完全暴露在中国驻印军的直接攻击之下。
Even before the offensive was launched in Morgang, General Stilwell had formulated a bold combat plan. He ordered an American regiment, the 88th Regiment of the new 30th Division, and the 150th Regiment of the 50th Division to march to Myitkyina. They were to take a detour route through the high mountains. Due to complex conditions, the risks in this clandestine maneuver were huge. but it might bring forth a major victory. And so on April the 28th, a joint shock unit of the Chinese and American armies set off for Myitkyina. In 1943, tanks of the Chinese army in India rumbled over bodies of Japanese soldiers and headed for Wukong and the Mogaung Valley. The new 38th Division under the command of Sun Liren and the new 22nd Division under the command of Liao Yaoxiang outflanked and thrust into the enemy forces, creating miracles of large-scale engagement in the history of the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression. However, the Japanese army did not give up. They had the strategic town of Myitkyina under their control, and they also had a secret plan which, if successful, would change the war situation in their favor. The town of Imphal on the India-Burma border was the supply and logistics base for the British Army in India. It was on an open plain and was thus easily accessible. It was favourable for large-scale military operations. At first, the Japanese headquarters could not reach a consensus on whether or not to attack Imphal. As Japan had by this time suffered defeats in the Pacific, and the Chinese army in India had launched unstoppable campaigns along the Lido Road, in the end the Japanese army decided to muster 90,000 soldiers to attack Imphal. If they won the battle, the morale of their army would be boosted, the Chinese army's supply base at Ramgarh would be threatened, and the Chinese army would be forced to retreat. And so in January 1944, the supreme headquarters of the Japanese army worked out a secret plan to mount an all-out attack on Imphal.
中国驻印军、中国和美国最开始提的这个反攻方向是想从英帕尔向曼德勒、缅中那个方向反击。如果真是那么反的话，恐怕这些情况就不出现了。
While the British army was surrounded by dangers, the Chinese army won one victory after another. General Joseph Stilwell knew that the monsoon season would soon arrive in Burma. The pouring rain would hinder large-scale military movements. What he needed was a symbolic victory before the end of the dry season. He chose Myitkyina as the place to achieve that victory. Myitkyina was a town of enormous strategic importance for the Chinese Expeditionary Force. It was the northern end of Burma's trunk rail line, a hub of land communication in northern Burma, and it was located at a crossing with the Lido Road.
不仅是陆上交通的枢纽，空中交通它也是一个枢纽。密支那的西郊和北郊有2个机场，那么正是这2个机场的存在，由于日军控制，那么日军的航空兵、空军以缅甸北部密支那的机场为依托，向北它的作战半径足以覆盖我们驼峰航线的相当一部分。正是由于日军航空兵以密支那机场为依托的不断的出击骚扰，极大的增加了驼峰航线中美空运力量的损失，并且迫使我们驼峰航线不断的向北、向北再向北，才能避开日军密支那航空兵的骚扰和拦截。那么越往北，空气越稀薄，越是崇山峻岭、喜马拉雅山的南路，损失就越大。所以无论从打通中印公路、控制缅北，还是让我们驼峰航线更为安全的一个角度考虑，夺取密支那都是必须的一个势在必得的一个作战过程。
When the Chinese army won its first victories in the Wukong Valley, Chiang Kai-shek dispatched the new 30th Division and the 50th Division to the valley. This greatly inspired Joseph Stilwell, and he came up with an audacious plan. He would wage 2 battles simultaneously. While troops under Sun Liren and Liao Yaoxiang attacked the Mogaung Valley, a Sino-American brigade would conduct a surprise attack on Myitkyina. If this plan worked, Stilwell would win an historic victory in the counterattack in northern Burma. However, the plan was a risky one.
当然，途中所有的艰辛绝对不是我们在这儿只取2个字所能涵盖的，啊，更深远距离的穿插迂回，虽然在作战上意味着更大的突然性和更好的奇袭效果，但是在迂回穿插的过程中，也意味着更多的辛苦，甚至更大的伤亡付出。啊，你在丛林中多待1天，多走1里路，那都是要付出极大的代价。
The main force in this operation was General Merrill's Marauders. Before this time, they had often completed penetrations and operated behind the Japanese line, but they had never stopped a retreating Japanese army, nor had they given the powerful Chinese army a chance to crush the enemy. On the contrary, they'd often been besieged by the Japanese army, and the Chinese army had come to their rescue. But General Stilwell decided to give General Merrill an opportunity to win the respect of their Chinese ally. But as the American forces had been reduced from 2,997 to 1,400 due to fierce battles, Stilwell had to modify his plan. Instead of taking Myitkyina with an all-American army, he organized a mixed task force made up of American officers and Chinese fighters.
它的编程中，有美军的5037步兵团，那么中国军队50师的150团，新30师的88团，和科钦突击队混编成3个突击支队。那么每个突击队都是由中美联合编成的，美军1个营，我们1个团，啊，美军1个上校指挥。最后的 M 支队是由美军的1个营和科钦突击队组成。那么只有这个支队没有中国人。
When the 18th Division of the Japanese Army had begun moving towards the Morgaung Valley, they had left behind them no more than 1,400 soldiers to defend Myitkyina. Clearly, those soldiers were too few to defend the town, but the Japanese didn't believe that the Chinese army could bypass Morgaung to raid Myitkyina, as the path was blocked by the perilous mountain Kamon Buam, and up to that time, no one had crossed the mountain. What made things worse was that 3 days after the Sino-American forces set out, the monsoon season arrived ahead of time. The soldiers were to suffer terribly on the slippery mountain paths. On some occasions, they even had to crawl their way forward. For the young soldiers, malaria, diarrhea and typhus fever were a constant threat. Some American soldiers became so distressed, they threw away their weapons.
去新民党大概经过半个多月吧，这个道路很难走，翻越2个大山吧，这个大山都很高的，原来是没道路，完全都开辟，这骡马上山下山非常困难。那个沿途看到美军的一些撂着很多东西，装备武器的撂着，在这方面呢，那就是跟中国不一样了。美国人生命第一。 能够把武器、把这些重装备不撂那个撂，但是中国不行，中国那武器装备那最重要的生命，啊，所以这做的不能遗弃，那是中国军队都看得非常。
The special force moved along the western side of Kamon Buam and then southward along the Hukong Valley. They kept far away from the battleground at Morgaung. When they approached Myitkyina, they did so stealthily. According to Stilwell's plan, the long-range penetrating special forces would seize the airports at Myitkyina, and then, with the airports as a base, they would transport reinforcement troops by air from India to capture Myitkyina. When the airports were taken and the signal "The Merchant of Venice" was sent out, the 10th US Air Force would escort planes of the Army Air Force over Myitkyina.
这次空天做的是实力为筹划的， 因为路程比较远。觉得如果是按照常规的打的话，可能会有很大的伤亡。兵贵神速嘛，出其不意，攻其不备，日本人根本想不到会有一场空降作战降落在密支那。密支那之战是整个缅北战役的高潮，是经典之役，是被载入史册的。为什么载入史册？是因为这场战役是中国军队，就是驻营军，也是所有在中国这个军事史上第一次实施现代化空降作战。这是空降作战。
On the mountain called Kamon Boom, the Special Forces trekked for 19 days. They were supposed to arrive and begin fighting on May the 12th, but the trek had been so arduous that the battle began 5 days later than the scheduled date. In the early morning of May the 17th, 1944, the Special Force under the command of General Merrill reached the outskirts of Myitkyina. A special task team then entered the airport and launched an all-out attack. The airport was successfully seized. 100 Japanese soldiers were killed. Shortly afterwards, swarms of Mitchell bombers of the 10th Air Force began to bomb the town.
地面部队崇山峻岭，远距离迂回穿插，夺占机场之后，保证空中大量的机降部队迅速介入，应该说是一场样式非常独特的、很漂亮的一场突袭空降战。
Taken by surprise, the Japanese defense troops immediately entered their underground fortification. Their action facilitated the movement of ground forces above. The Special Force charged the enemy and extended the battle outside the airport. In just 50 minutes, they occupied the airports and seized a large quantity of provisions and weapons. At 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the headquarters received the long-awaited signal, the Merchant of Venice. Next, numerous transport planes hauling gliders took off from airports in Lido and Xinguiyang and flew to Myitkyina. The gliders released from the transport planes touched down one after another until midnight. The next day, more transport planes arrived, and General Stilwell, with a carbine over his shoulder and a group of journalists around him, appeared at the airport. News of the capture of Myitkyina soon spread throughout the world.
这次表现出来的战斗力就是强大的、现代化的、丝丝入扣的。史迪威得到了实际的指挥权，而史迪威采取的是美式的打法。你看，长途奔袭、空降作战、坦克作战，这都是美式打法，很华丽的、很豪华的。
The successful raid shocked the Japanese army in Burma. It was a sensitive moment. The Japanese army was caught in battles with the Allied forces in Arakan on the southeastern coast, in the Morgang Valley on the northwest, in Myitkyina in the north of Burma, and in Tangchung in the west of China's Yunnan province. A month earlier, on March the 8th, 1944, the Battle of Imphal had begun. The Japanese army, with 3 divisions and 90,000 men, had laid siege to Imphal. By the end of March, the north-south road to Imphal was completely cut off. At the time, Mutaguchi Renya, the commander of the operation, bragged, "The Japanese army is invincible. The flag of the rising sun will announce that our victory in India is not far off." In Burma, April was the monsoon month. By then, with the help of the American Air Force, the British Army had gathered 150,000 soldiers around Imphal to launch intense ground attacks. There would also be air raids. The Japanese army, stuck in the muddy jungle, found it extremely difficult to march, let alone launch attacks. Countless Japanese soldiers were killed or starved to death in the jungle. Division commanders proposed they withdraw their troops. Mutaguchi Renya, however, refused to issue such an order. He insisted that they seize Imphal before Tenno's birthday, which was the 29th of April. And so, the fighting continued. The last thing the Japanese could have realized was that the battle had been an absurd one right from the beginning. The Japanese 15th Army, with the 31st, 33rd and 15th Divisions, was the main attack force. But when the battle began, they had not reached their designated positions. The rear part of the 15th Division was still in Thailand, and the unit was spread across much of the north of Burma. 1,000 miles to their west, the 31st Division had already begun fighting. The campaign was a mess from the outset.